Welcome to an episode of InRange. This is the July 2021 Q&A. These questions are provided by Patreon supporters only because InRange is supported only by you, the viewer. We're actively demonetized, no corporates, no overlords, no sponsors, just you, the viewer. Thank you for all of you out there doing that, and the questions are provided by you, the Patreons, today. If you'd like to consider supporting this project, you can find us at patreon.com/InRangeTV. There's always a lot of questions, so let's go ahead and get that going. Henry S. If John Browning never invented the tilting barrel action, what do you believe would be the dominant pistol action? Well, there's a couple of them that I think would be contenders for that. The one that makes the most sense to me would be a rotating barrel or a fixed barrel. You see that with, like, for example, the HKP9 was a fixed barrel, and a lot of guns had fixed barrels, and fixed barrels are really excellent for a lot of things. They're very good for suppression, they're very good for accuracy and consistency because the barrel is not moving and it is not locking in a way that causes it to tilt or turn or anything like that. However, I also think that the turning barrel action, in which the locking lugs around the barrel turn into recesses on the slide, would probably be the alternative to the tilting barrel action we see so common with all of the John Browning designs. So my answer is really twofold. Either the turning barrel or rotating barrel might be the better term, really, or the fixed barrel, which requires some other mechanisms to lock the action. So that's my thought, at least. Adam N. Considering that the Army supply chain in the Southwest after the Civil War was strained at best and non-existent at worst, do you think that the indigenous fighters had as hard a time as the Army as getting enough supplies to fight effectively? Absolutely. I mean, supply in the West and the Southwest, as you're describing here, for both the Army and the indigenous forces was extremely limited. Ammunition was really the most valuable resource you could get your hands on, amongst, of course, food and water, just to stay alive. So did the indigenous forces have a very difficult time with their supply chain? They absolutely did. There are some really interesting creative ways they tried to reload ammunition, even just shoving round balls in it. And there's even some stories, some apocryphal ones, but I think that there might be some truth to it, of actually making wood plugs, essentially putting powder and a primer and then shoving a piece of wood into the cartridge case and using that as a projectile. Now, that of course would only be for very, very close range, but nonetheless, a wood hard enough that's fired at close range is still a pretty effective projectile, especially in the days before armor. So there's absolutely, the indigenous people had a very difficult time getting ammunition, frankly, probably a harder time than the Army, which had at least some form of a supply chain. Nyrom. I know it's a video game trope, but do you believe it's possible we'll see development of a augmented reality style glasses for combat troops, which essentially give them a HUD, a heads-up display? There are already scopes that can identify range, wind, humidity, etc., and technology develops exponentially faster with each passing year. It's not just possible, it already exists. The last SHOT Show that I went to before COVID hit, I demonstrated, or actually had a video of a solution very similar to this, in which targets could be marked, waypoints could be marked. There was a HUD that went over your right eye, actually very similar in at least appearance to the heads-up display from the movie Aliens, and it would tell you where targets were. It would tell you where friendlies were. It would help identify targets for both different groups in your fire team, and so this already exists. And in fact, the stuff that we're seeing in the public data sphere is probably quite old compared to what's actually being used in the experimental data sphere. So my guess is that this is already in use and has been in use for a while, and augmented reality style glasses for ground combat troops are absolutely already in use. That's my guess. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but that's my thought. So in that regard, that's not just a likelihood, but it's not just something that might happen, it's something that is happening. Tim K. Do you think your stage designs would be radically different if you'd spent years competing at a high level in a discipline other than NRA high power? So for those of you in the audience that don't know this, I am a long-time, many-year NRA high power shooter with 28 leg points towards the 30 required to become a distinguished rifleman. That's across the course. That's 200 yards standing, 200 yards sitting rapid fire, 300 yards rapid fire prone, and 600 yards slow fire prone. When I did it, all iron sights with a similar to an M16A2 using 69 and 72 grain projectiles. I did that for a long time. It's a very difficult discipline, and it does definitely teach you the fundamentals of marksmanship. However, it's interesting because NRA high power is the least influential for me in terms of my stage designs. My stage designs come from a myriad of different sources, and I would say the ones that actually fit most into what this is would be believe it or not, cowboy action shooting plays quite heavily into stage design, and you'll see that with target presentations. Things in which you shift from targets with double or single hits or triple hits, like 3 on that one, 2 on that one, 3 on that one, or repeat, or 1, 1, 1, repeat with no double taps. That's a derivative of cowboy action shooting more than anything. And then a lot of the other things you see in my 2-gun action challenge match and brutality events come from training events that I attended as a civilian. So there was a good chunk of time pre-InRange in which I took a whole bunch of training courses from a whole bunch of training venues, and like Viking tactics, that would be an example, although I did a lot of VTAC drills, even though I don't think I did have a class from Viking tactics at one point. Mike Panone, the list goes on and on. To be honest with you, it was quite extensive for a while, and that combined with cowboy action shooting, and probably are the two most fundamentally influential things that have been a muse for my stage designs. Charles E. To what extent are big tech, in quotes, the robber barons of the 21st century? Well, I don't know that I would use that as a direct analogy. But the big tech, the corporate oligarchy of the internet, the small handful of corporations that essentially control the majority of any platform that has any reach on the internet, do harken back to problems that have been extant in the past, such as the power of the railroad and eminent domain, actually still a thing. Way back when the telco companies tried to flex their strength and there was a breakup of Ma Bell. Corporations that get too large become problematic in terms of one's ability to have autonomy and free speech. And, it's a matter of scale. When the internet first started and there was tons of little competitive companies and all of them had their administrative control and would decide what or was not allowed on their platform, was a different problem than when you get to a situation of where it's only 3 companies or 4 companies, and of those 4 companies, almost without pretty much any platform that has a user base has the same access controls or has the same type of sometimes very inappropriate manipulation of the algorithm, or what's allowed or what's not allowed, or not even consistent application of such rules. And we now see recently an announcement from at least part of the Biden administration, which there's a discussion about creating a centralized tool for that when someone is blocked from one platform, they'll be blocked from all of them. That's a very disturbing trend, and it's one that I was not expecting to see, to be honest with you. I thought we were moving more down the path of reducing, or hopefully reducing the power of the corporate oligarchy. But aggregating the corporate oligarchy with the power of government censorship, because at that point it is censorship. What Facebook does when they kick you off Facebook isn't technically censorship. They are not the government, and you, in theory, don't have a right to their platform. I agree with that in principle. But at the same time, when the public square is owned by Facebook and Google, and that's about it, and if you're not allowed to be on Facebook or Google's playground, and therefore have no longer the ability to have a voice on the internet, that changes the conversation from one of private space and corporation and their ability to use a private platform or let you use a private platform to when does a private platform become something that's so intertwined with society that it's no longer really private. Now, I'm not saying we should nationalize it. That's not my point either. But I do, and I've said this before, I think there needs to be some concern and control over what corporations can and cannot do in terms of their just arbitrary and capricious control of speech on their platforms when their platforms grow to be the size that they are. But what we saw recently with the announcement of this idea from the Biden administration of aggregating their control and centralizing it to one ban tool, like the biggest ban hammer of all, is extremely disturbing. And there's a lot more to go into with this, and maybe I'll do a video on this alone. But a lot of people in the comments, I posted something about this on Facebook, a little commentary, and this is quite honestly the exact opposite of what I was hoping to see. But when I posted this on Facebook, there was a bunch of commentary, and there was a couple people that actually commented with the same thing that was going through my mind, which is the aggregation of, or the collusion of government and corporate powers together is the very definition of fascism. And it doesn't seem to matter which one of these, it doesn't seem to matter anymore which side of the bipolar authoritarian coin we flip in this country, you still flip up to the answer of authoritarianism. And that's something I'm opposed to in all forms. So more to come on that. Swoley War. What sci-fi universe do you find most compelling? Which one would you want to be a part of? And I like that. I love the question being both, because that's a very good point. The sci-fi universe I find most compelling is generally cyberpunk, dystopian, or I have to admit, the world that the Aliens universes and in the Weyland-Yutani Space Marine thing, I find that very compelling from a entertainment and intellectual exercise perspective. However, I would want nothing to do with that universe. It's a horrible, dark, bleary, disgusting place. So if I were to want to be part of a sci-fi universe, well, the easy one to pick is Star Trek. Star Trek is a post-need society in which rational thought and enlightenment and reason is used as most of the application of how society is run. So a post-need world in which we use enlightenment and reason towards one another would be the world I'd want to live in. But in terms of entertaining and watching, I guess the Aliens, Weyland-Yutani world is the one I tend to get drawn to if I'm going to put on a movie or look into some sort of fictional literature. Florian G. What do you consider the InfoSec equivalent of a carry gun and a trauma kit? All right, that's a really good one, because we've talked about this on InRange a lot. The idea that if you're going to be someone that's carrying PPE into the world, personal protection equipment, a trauma kit is actually well beyond a personal protection equipment device. It's probably much more likely for someone around you that you may not even know. In fact, I would say a trauma kit's more valuable than the gun in terms of its need to probably be actually used by yourself at some point in your life. But so those are basic fundamentals. A gun for self-defense, a trauma kit for personal or someone else's life-saving needs. But those are the basics, right? So what you're asking here is, what's the most basic thing you can do for your information security? And I would say the most basic thing you can do for your information security is to deploy a good password manager database. Whether you want to use one that has a cloud-based infrastructure with proper encryption, or one that you want to do sort of DIY with proper encryption that you keep on your own personal devices, is up to you. But I think the most basic thing you can do for your online security is to ensure strong passwords that you never use anywhere but once on every individual platform for which you have an account and a password. And I say strong, I mean 16 characters, 24 characters, even random gibberish, the highest amount of entropy you can do. And store those in a properly encrypted, perhaps two-factor authentication enforced database that is probably distributed amongst multiple devices, your handheld surveillance device, but also your computers, because you're going to need those passwords no matter where you go. Now, I don't advise integrating it into your web browser. I advise you running it as a separate app. I advise using very strong authentication to your password database manager for obvious reasons, but then allow that to manage your passwords in terms of generating them, character length, and entropy, and then ensuring you never use the same password anywhere ever again, even once. That would be the basic fundamental InfoSec equivalent of a carry gun and a trauma kit. Red Army Reenactor. What are your thoughts on the German PPSH-41 conversions? Is it an interesting attempt to make do with what you have, or a needless expense given the quantity of captured supply? So for those of you that don't know, the Germans went through a thought exercise, as they seem to with everything during World War II, where they got ahead of themselves of engineering development and R&D. They burned so much energy on unnecessary R&D on 7 billion projects that they seem to outstrip their ability to manufacture any of them in any viable numbers, which was, of course, a huge war of attrition of World War II, especially on the Eastern Front. So what they did at one point is they had a significant number, not surprising, of captured Russian, Soviet Papashaws, the PPSH-41 submachine gun, chambered in 7.63 or 7.62 Tokarev. I was going to say 7.63 Mauser, but that's not that far off. 7.63 Mauser, 7.62 Tokarev is really 7.63 Mauser plus P. Anyways, what they did is they converted the magazine well to take other feeding devices, stick mags, that they had large amounts of, and then chambered them in 9mm versus 7.62 Tokarev. I don't know how many of them they did. There were accounts of the Germans using captured Papashaws, and whether this is apocryphal or not, it's hard to say, but the drum magazine that was used, very commonly with the Papashaw was so indicative of the enemy that German soldiers would fire friendly fire on another German soldier using a captured Russian Papashaw. So putting stick mags into that thing would have been one way to solve that problem, at least from a target identification perspective, but also chambering it in 9mm was a way to use ammunition manufactured by your own country. However, as the question answers itself, was this a needless expense given the quantity of captured supply? And my answer to that is, yeah, it absolutely was a needless expense. It was another waste of research and development. It was another waste of human resources. And it was just another gee whiz German experiment that they just really couldn't seem to stop themselves from engaging in every possible field of equipment, whether it was planes, tanks, cars, trains, automobiles, or firearms. Jordan, this is a hard-hitting question. We got to be serious about this one. Barbie Girl by Aqua, or All Around the World by ATC. And this is easy. Barbie Girl. Because if you're going to go to that level of atrociously horrible pop music, you might as well go all the way to the dark heart of the evil that exists within it and just embrace it and just eat from it and relish it. And All Around the World is reasonably tolerable. Barbie Girl is not, especially if you watch the music video associated with it. So if we're going to go straight to the heart of this and really just delve and stare into that abyss, I would say Barbie Girl by Aqua is one of the tools you could do to do that. Herc, any thoughts on offset? Example, 45-degree or angled iron sights or red dots as backups for magnified optics. I think they're fine. I think they're a really good idea, in fact. Much better than sitting them on top like we see with ACOGs. So what this means is you have a low parity, like either you have a fixed 4x or 5x or even an LPVO, and then off to the side, usually on the right side, if you're right-handed, you have iron sights that are at 45 degrees or red dot sight, and you just barely cant the gun, and by tilting your head, you can get on the red dot or the iron sights. And Herc, these work great. Absolutely, it's a really good solution. It's something we started seeing in 3-gun and even 2-gun, essentially the competitive environments, and it works really well. It works much better than stacking them. And we now see them being used by soldiers in the field too, at least when they're allowed to do so. So I think offset 45-degree iron sights or red dot sights are an excellent backup solution. Derek P. Do you think that night vision technology can be, or in the future will be, affordable and viable for hunting or home defense applications? I would argue it's getting to that point now, considering what people are paying for firearms. I don't think that that night vision, especially surplus, has really gone up in value the same way that firearms and ammunition have. So if you're able to spend, sadly, this much to get a rifle, you're probably able to bump it up a little more and even get night vision. Now, we're not talking the best night vision. We're talking simplistic stuff like a PVS-14 and probably a used unit. But we're talking in the $2,500, $3,000 range. Still a completely serviceable and usable one, night vision device. You have to define for yourself if that's affordable. I realize that that's not affordable by many people's standards. Are they viable for hunting? They absolutely are viable for hunting, with the exception of many places do not allow them for hunting. So if you're going to look into night vision for the purposes of hunting, you better find out that the place you're going to hunt at allows you to use it for hunting. because very few places do. Thermal has that problem too. Are they viable for self-defense or home defense? I don't think so, unless you're going to go weapon mounted. The reality is, first of all, lower tier night vision isn't really high enough quality for you to be able to do very good target identification. I mean, from a military application perspective, it totally is. You can tell enemy or foe. But when you're talking about home defense, you're talking about, is that someone I know? Is that my brother? Is it my mother? Is it my kid? And maybe you could do that with night vision, but night vision requires focusing in and out. You kind of have like an infinity focus. Anything inside of it becomes a little blurry. That might be good enough for you to identify with, but reality is, why? Unless you think that the threat coming into your house is going to be night vision capable, I don't know that you need that. Really, just a good value, a very good quality white light, especially a very bright one, is better. One, you can use it to identify more easily, especially within the confines of a house where focus isn't an issue with an optic. Secondarily, a very bright light is in its own way sort of an offensive tool. It won't stop someone from being able to do something like shoot a gun at you, but if you use it properly, you can blind people very effectively. And in force-on-force drills that I've been a part of, I've been absolutely blinded by my opponent's white light, and it really does work. So I think that night vision is not a viable application for home defense. You're not trying to be stealthy in that regard. I mean, obviously you don't want to give away your location, but a white light's better, not only for focus and target identification, but also to blind your opposition. Austin T. Do you think a VZ58 and 5.56, with the upgrades you made to your 7.62 by 39 rifle, if you didn't see it, I did a two-part series here on InRange where I did a whole modernization on a VZ 2008, one of the Century Arms VZ58s, and it was a really fun project. So would that be able to keep up with a basic AR-15 in a competitive environment? And would the VZ58 AR mag adapter make any difference? Keep up is an interesting thing. So take someone of the same equal skill with the same amount of time on both platforms. If you were to put the VZ58 AR mag adapter in it that allows for drop-free magazines, I would say in terms of weapon manipulation at that point, if you modernized it with all the bits and baubles that I did for mine, and then put in a AR mag adapter, you would be able to keep up with weapon manipulations, at least with this highly modified VZ58, that you would be with an AR-15. The safety is the only kludge, but not enough to worry about. The problem is in terms of optics mounting. I put a side rail and an optics rail, and that works great for a red dot or even a fixed magnification optic in some instances. But the way the VZ58 ejects from the top, it really limits the sighting systems you could place on the weapon. So if you're going through a course of fire that's out to like 200 yards, 300 max, and a red dot sight is where if both weapons were sighted with the same sighting system, and you had the AR mag adapter in your VZ58, I think it would keep up. Yes, I do. Without the VZ58 mag adapter, it would be behind by a small percentage, but behind nonetheless. Even with ambidextrous mag release on mine, you still have to hit the button and it drops free. And you kind of got to wiggle the gun because it doesn't drop free. You have to shake it or hit it on something. That alone is enough to add a couple percentage points of delay. So an AR mag adapter would be a drop-free thing when the mag drops free. Drop-free mags typically don't drop free when they need to. But I think you're getting close, and it's getting to be the point where the big difference would be the sighting system and what you could or could not mount on the weapon. Other than that, if you have the same optics, I think a highly modified, modernized VZ58, even the one that I put together, would be viable and quite competitive against an AR counterpart. Plocky21. Hi Carl, love your work. Thank you, Plocky. Third time asking, but what do you think of personal bunkers, shelters in a SHTF situation or natural disaster? At what point do you think it's overkill, and what do you think are the essentials? Plocky, this depends on what your natural disaster is you're trying to deal with. So, also, SHTF is hard to define as well. Let's go with the natural disaster one. Quite clearly, if you're in an area that has tornadoes, you need something that is safe for you to take shelter in and be protected from the storm outside that could really destroy your home and you in it. So that's one example, and yes, you need a bunker for that, or a basement at least. Hurricanes are a different issue, of course, right? Essentials are very simple, and it's not firearms. It's food and, even more importantly, water. And hopefully some batteries and some lights and some communication tools. This is such a broad question, and it kind of falls into like almost a prepper kind of thing, which I'm not saying that you are or are not. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. That I don't think I can give you a very good answer on this, because it really needs to be more defined. There's instances where it could be overkill, but at the same time, who is it for me to define overkill for someone who's doing something on their personal property? If this is what you think is necessary for you, then go for it. As long as you're not impinging on someone else and a bunker makes you feel better, then why not? Philip W. is moose milk, in air quotes, which is, by the way, ballistol and water. Ballistol is my favorite cleaning agent that I use for almost all of my guns. And when you add ballistol and water together, it's referred to as moose milk. It kind of lushes and becomes a white hue, very much like absinthe does, actually. It brings the solids out of the ballistol and emulsifies into a white color. That's moose milk. Appropriate for cleaning corrosive primer residue. So the question is moose milk, ballistol, and water appropriate for cleaning corrosive primer residue? And the answer is absolutely yes. The thing you use to clean corrosive primer salts is water. Water dissolves the salts. Just like you use water to clean black powder, which is corrosive, water also cleans corrosive primer residue salts, just like it does black powder residue. So the benefit of using ballistol and water is you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get a preservative anti-rusting agent, which is the ballistol, and you get the water, which is used for the dissolving of the corrosive salts. Typically with moose milk, you do like a 25 to 75% ratio, 25% ballistol to 75% water. Sometimes you can go 50-50. But once you've used the moose milk, I find that it accelerates the cleaning with black powder, and it would absolutely accelerate the cleaning with corrosive residue. And then you can finish with ballistol when you're done. So yes, moose milk is absolutely appropriate for cleaning corrosive primer residue. 3-lock. Is the idea of woodland brutality in the eastern U.S. dead? So what is being asked here is, during COVID, we pretty much shut down all of the matches. We do have the regular local match now. The 2G ACM, Tucson, and Phoenix are running again. And we do have Desert Brutality 2021 for St. George, Utah coming up in November. If you're a Patreon supporter, you have access to that right now. It'll eventually go public. Whether or not there'll be seats left when it goes public, I don't know. And the Two Gun Action Army got early access with a discount, just like is the norm. And we have Finnish Brutality in October in Helsinki, Finland. But in terms of woodland brutality, was the idea of doing a brutality match on the eastern U.S. And we were working with Les and collaborating with him in regards to that. He's a great guy of Polaris Logistics who's helped ship our rifles to Finland and back. And is the idea dead? No. Is the idea good for this year? No, because frankly, all the spoons are spent in trying to do Finnish brutality and desert brutality in St. George and get it all done this year. So we're not missing a year entirely of a brutality match. It's way off course because of everything that happened with the pandemic. So at this moment, Les, I apologize, we haven't been able to get there. But I think next year we will get to woodland brutality, and we will see more brutality matches in general. But please be patient. If you're really interested in a brutality match, there is Finnish brutality and desert brutality coming this year. And I think next year we will expand into woodland brutality. So it's not dead, it's just delayed. Yuri R. When it comes to muzzle devices, we have flash suppressors, recoil suppressors, sound suppressors. What is so special about a sound suppressor or a suppressor, and what is so special about sound suppression that it has made a multi-$100 and multi-month investment, whereas you can get a functioning version of the others for the cost of a burrito and have it shipped directly to your door? So I guess your question is why pay the extra amount of money to get a suppressor? And I have to say, I have a number of suppressors. I have like 3 of them, and they are cool, and some are more effective than others, but they're not that useful. I hate to say it. Are they useful from a tactical perspective if you're in combat or fighting from inside your house? Yes. You don't go deaf, and in the field, of course, what you're shooting at can have a much more difficult time identifying the source of fire. But for the average person, I got to tell you, maybe in places where you're allowed to hunt with a suppressor, that would be great. But for just going to the range, or just shooting, or just blinking in the field, or going to a match for that matter, suppressors really aren't worth the effort. They cost a lot of money. You have to go through the NFA process. And while they're nice and pleasant in general to be around compared to like a muzzle brake, for example, the truth is that they're heavy, they add extra weight, some are better than others, they get super hot, you could burn yourself with them, and there's of course regulatory control about if you want to take it from one state to another, blah, blah, blah. So I think if you want a suppressor for hunting, if you want it for any particular home defense or self-defense reasons, or you're just a fan of technology, they're amazing. But if you don't have it, don't need it for any of those reasons I enumerated, I'd be hard pressed to advise someone you really need a suppressor. Straw man group training and security. Second time asking, sorry. What do you think of the recent photos making cycles on social media of guns disguised as children's toys, and what impact do you think it has on safety? This is what we'd refer to in information security world as steganography, in which you make something look like something else or hide something in something. Steganography is when you take like a JPEG file and there's actually data in the picture that you can't see, but it's in the metadata or embedded in there. You have to have a decoder ring to be able to read the data in the steganography enabled or enhanced piece of content. So you're making a real gun. You're using a stego concept and making a real gun look like a children's toy. This isn't a new thing. This has been around a long time. What do I think impact it has on safety? I don't think it really has much of an impact on safety at all, beyond the unintended consequence of making it more justifiable, and I don't mean this in reality, I mean air quotes justifiable, to shoot at someone or a kid or whatever that has a gun that looks like a toy gun when they point it at someone inappropriately. So that makes it really more dangerous to have a toy gun than it does to have the real gun, or at least equivalency. So do I think this is a good idea? No, I think it's stupid. I think it causes problems. I don't think it has any impact on the safety of actual firearms, but I definitely think it has an impact on the safety of maybe kids playing with a toy, and I wouldn't do this, and I don't think it's a great idea. Fat Man Tactical. What are your thoughts on carrying a CCW handgun with a red dot? I think they're fine. In fact, I advise it. I think a CCW handgun with a red dot is the way I want to go. In fact, at this point I've said I'm using the Hellcat, and it has a red dot on it, and if you can carry a pistol with a red dot, why would you not? Literally, why would you not? There's no deficiency, only advantages. So it doesn't make you faster like a lot of people think, but it does make you more accurate. And if you have to fire your CCW, which would be a terrible day indeed, why would you not want that? I don't see any disadvantage, quite honestly, especially with the newer, smaller guns that we have now that make it much easier to carry them with a red dot. Eyeball. My dad just gave me a MilSerp rifle, and the wooden stock looks dry, in air quotes. What treatment do you recommend to refresh the wood yet retain the World War II look? Well, I don't know the wood that's on your particular rifle, but historically speaking, and probably most reliably speaking, use a linseed oil. I think you can get it at just like Ace Hardware or whatever, or like Home Depot. Linseed oil is frequently used to treat military weapons of that period. And if you were to take the metal out of the gun, take all the metal out and just have the wood pieces, and then rub linseed oil into them, that is most likely going to give you the best appearance and finish and lack of stain that you're going to get from some other things. Certain oils and stuff will change the color of the wood. That's another thing, even with linseed oil. Apply it to a small area. Make sure you're not seeing a shift of color that you would not want, because you want the thing to look consistent. But linseed oil is probably your best bet. Gator Doc. Why do you think modular guns like the ACR and ARX-100 never really took off? Is it because the AR dominates the market, or because they failed with the multiple caliber options? I can tell you right now, this multiple caliber option thing is not a thing. Like, yeah, you can get a gun, and then you can get an extra barrel and a bolt and blah, 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 blah. And you can make this one gun become 308, or this one gun become 308, a 5.56, and 6.5 Creedmoor. And it's gee whiz and neat. But I don't think that particular thing sells guns. And I think most people buy a gun and they leave it in the caliber it came in, with rare exception. I think the reality is, the reason they didn't take off isn't because they never got to having multiple caliber options. It's because they didn't provide anything that really differentiated them or made them better than a cheaper equivalent AR-15, of which this market is oh so saturated with. If you come out with something that's another PMAG adapter that shoots 5.56, that's a black rifle with probably slightly less than the optimal ergonomics of an AR-15, why are you bothering with this thing? It doesn't do anything better, costs more, and it has proprietary parts. It really isn't worth the effort at that point, and I don't know why. I mean, for the most part, unless you're just a gun collector, you're just going to buy an AR and not worry about all those things that come with it, proprietary parts, etc. Raha. Do you own any Norwegian weapons? Only one. I have one of the Kar 98s that were converted into an F2 format. At the end of World War, I did a video on it here on InRange. At the end of World War II, when the treaty was signed, or when the Germans unconditionally surrendered, goodbye Nazis. A bunch of German troops that were stationed in Norway just gave up all their weapons, and they had piles and piles of K98Ks. And the Norwegians are looking at these piles of K98Ks, and they're like, well, I guess we're going to rearm with these because we have a ton of free ones. And they did. They didn't have a lot of 8mm Mauser ammunition, though, and so they rechambered them to 30-06, 30 caliber. And a small number were then reconverted again to 308 NATO, or 7.62 NATO. I know when everyone loves it. When I say 308 NATO, it's kind of fun. But to 7.62 by 51. So I do own one of those Kar 98s that was converted to the F2 format. But that's the only Norwegian weapon that I own. I would love to have one of the Königsberg's 1911s. 1914s, I guess, right? Mark C, I think that's right. 1914 Königsberg's, essentially the Norwegian 1911. Mark C, can we expect any future episodes of American-made series in the near future? The Red Dot series was a good watch, and I enjoy seeing this branch out to other products. Yes, there will be more of that coming. It just takes time, and to get that done right is a slow, tedious effort, and you have to use it at matches, etc. to give a proper review. And we only try to do proper reviews here on this channel, not just a gee whiz, it worked for 15 rounds on the range review. So yes, there will be more of that, and that is coming. Bryce D. Would you rather take a Winchester 1876 lever gun or a US M1917 into World War I? You know, this is where I'm going to deviate from my original, people are going to think I'm deviating, but I'm not. I think at this point, the 1876 experiments that I've been doing on InRange, of which we haven't really completed or closed the loop on, that gun is essentially just an upscaled 1873, but in much more powerful cartridge. It comes with problems and liabilities, and I don't know that the 1876 is the panacea that I kind of thought it might have been when I started toying with the idea. In fact, I think the 1873 is where the lever gun sort of peaked at being ultimate lever gun, and that peaked at being a pistol caliber style cartridge, essentially a PCC, or not a submachine gun, but equivalent thereof. And depends on this. So in World War I would say that I think I would rather have an 1873 lever gun with higher capacity, low recoil, and high rate of fire, especially in a trench raid, than an 1876 or an M1917. But since you're giving me the choice between this 1876 and the M1917, I'm going with the M1917 bolt action, which, by the way, I believe is the best bolt action of the war. Pat W. Do you have any pets? I do. 2 cats, 1 dog. Paul S. What muse speaks to you when designing 2G ACM and brutality stages? Well, Paul, I sort of touched on this earlier, right? Talked about the combination of cowboy action shooting and training events. But what I like to do, or try to do with my stage designs, is one, make them interesting and intellectually stimulating, like it kind of simulates something. And what's more important as a muse is each one of these particular stages tries to test a specific or particular skill set. My goal is to test skills on the clock. So essentially a training style environment that's got enough of a match mixed in that it's no longer a training event, but is a match, but still tests skill sets. So my muse would be, is how do we take a training environment, make it fun, keep it fun, but turn it into a stage. Z. If you could bring one fictional weapon to life from a movie, video game, TV show, book, etc., what would you choose? The first one that popped in my mind was the smart gun from Aliens that's on the backpack and has the augmented reality and tracks targets. But the more I thought about it, the more I went to, what would be more cool, actually, from an interesting perspective, was the laser thread rapier thing from the film Johnny Mnemonic. If you didn't see it, the Yakuza bad guys, at least one of them has a ring on his finger, and he's got a little piece on it, and he pulls it out, and it becomes a filament that he can spin around and cut things with. And I think that's just pretty badass. So I'm going to go with the laser thread ring from Johnny Mnemonic. I think it's Michal, M-I-C-H-A-L. It might be misspelled, or it's Michal. Most plate carriers seem to cover only a limited amount of the body, so why is armor for additional parts, legs, arm, sides, not popular? There's been an attempt to do this over and over and over again. Add extra plates to make sure that you're more armored up. And each and every time it's gotten to the point where the soldiers using that can't move in it. They become like this Michelin man and they're wobbling around in it. These plates, even ceramics, are heavy. Ceramic can be fragile. The more you add, the more it degrades your ability to move. And being able to move, especially when taking fire, is very important. So I think it's much more valuable to get out of the line of fire than to take a hit with armor on. So what I think we see is covering the most important parts of the body from an ambush or shot, or hopefully if you're lucky, although getting hit with a bullet is not a lucky thing, but getting hit in your plate carrier or your plates with a bullet's better than getting hit without a plate. Covering the most significant parts of your body, heart, lungs, etc., has become the norm, and it will continue to be the norm until we see something dramatically change with body armor. The truth is, just adding more and more plates just becomes more and more inviable to move with. David, how would you load a blank for a percussion cap muzzle loading rifle? It's actually very easy. So you would pour powder down the bore and whatever the charge should be, and then you would just you would use a wad, a paper wad probably, something that can't cause a fire and can't become a projectile, so something that will just wad up, like, frankly, paper is actually a good wad for this, or a fire retardant type material, and you just wad it with something that's soft, like I said, something that can't become a projectile, and you've made a blank. Once you put the percussion cap and fire it, the black powder goes off, that paper or little piece of cloth will fly out the end, make a big old noise, fire and smoke, but doesn't have a projectile. You simply just don't provide a projectile. Stuffing it with something that could become a projectile, like really crushing in some cream of wheat or something, that would work too, but you have to be cautious with that because you gotta remember, a blank is still a dangerous thing. There's like the gases, heat, fire, and anything you've shoved down that barrel is lethal at the right range. If you put a blank up to someone's head and fire it, it will kill them. So even a percussion rifle, one. So what you wad that with is a projectile, but depending on what it is, could be not really realistically worth considering as a projectile. For example, a piece of cloth or paper past 10 yards is going to be absolutely nothing, right? Let's see here. Orlantia. Hey Carl, long-time viewer, first-time asker. You had previously mentioned that you don't like manual safeties added to pistols with trigger safeties, especially for CCW considerations. What are your thoughts on having a manual safety on something like the P365 that does not have a trigger dingus and otherwise has no safety other than trigger weight? Well, I personally think that the lack of a trigger dingus on the P365 is a bad design. I don't think the P365 is necessarily dangerous or something like that, but we've seen SIG have some problems with dropped guns going off. Not the P365 that I can recall directly, but a dingus prevents that, and that's why it exists. I personally am still not a fan of a manual safety on a carry pistol, and I don't care for them. I think that can be something that will be lost in the stress of the time unless you train specifically with it all the time, needing to swipe it on or off. And so the Glock-like dingus trigger safety is a really good workaround. And so I personally find it weird that SIG has decided not to do that with the P365. And if I were to be using a P365, I would not augment it with a manual safety. I just wouldn't. I would be careful about not dropping it, and hopefully they've done their homework and it is still drop safe regardless. Now, obviously, a trigger safety, a dingus, does not prevent you from accidentally or negligently discharging the gun, but neither does a manual safety. So when you're not firing, keep your finger off the trigger. Jacob G. Desert Brutality divisions tend to have a retro option with a mid-80s cutoff that would allow early Glock 17s, but not qualify for Gen 3 and above. That's true. Given that reproduction retro AR-15s are permitted, what would be the retro status of the recent Glock Pistola 80 reproduction of a Gen 1 G17? Absolutely the same thing. If someone's making a reproduction of the original gun, such as the Pistol 80, the Glock P80, that would be fine for Desert Brutality in the retro or classic divisions or whatever you're using the terminology for. So just like a retro AR-15 is fine, a retro Glock would be fine too. Seth G. Fourth time asking. I'm sorry, Seth. Other than the terrible grip angle, trigger, and aesthetics of a Glock, I don't agree, Glocks are fine. Do you think that there's a dime's worth of difference between most of the plastic striker-fired handguns on the market? No, I don't. I think a Glock, the reason Glock's great is because they're so ubiquitous. Parts, aftermarket parts, magazines are everywhere, holsters. So I personally think if you're going to go with a polymer pistol, for the most part, just go with the Glock. If you're going for a full size, for sure. But the reality is, these guns to me are all functionally equivalent. Sean S. Out of all the firearms designed by John Browning, what has been your favorite one to actually shoot? I like the high power, and I like the 1911. I don't think a 1911 is what I'd want to use today, but the 1911 is a really fun gun to use, as is the high power. Timo G. How many Finnish guns do you own? Finnish guns are awesome. You're right, Finnish guns are awesome, and sadly I must say I own none. Sorry. Mickey M. Despite a large demand in the collector market, why do we not see modern reproductions of rare firearms in already common calibers, like the 1895 Winchester in 7.62x54R, or a Martini Henry in .303, or even a new Pedersen device? Because no one will buy them, Mickey. Here's the thing. The collectors want the originals. They don't want reproductions, typically speaking. And people who want to shoot want things that are low cost. Making a reproduction of these things is high cost, and it doesn't interest the collector who wants an original, and the cost makes it not interesting for the most part of people who want to shoot. So these types of reproductions really have a very small market. Rick Smith of SMG Guns makes beautiful Type 1 and Type 2 FG42s, and I think those are now up to, he had to go up a little bit. They're either $5,000 or $5,500 per gun, and he's barely scraping by at that price. They're amazing guns. If you want an FG42, he's the only guy to go to, in my opinion. But you're going to pay $5,500 for one because that's the bare minimum he can charge and keep himself still eating food while making them. So when you think about this stuff is hard to do, very expensive to do. The volume that people that want to buy them is small. Therefore, the cost must be high to recoup your R&D and your efforts to make them. Collectors don't want them, and the people that say they want to shoot them don't want to pay for what they cost. That's the real answer. Martin M. What do you do to a gun after handling it before you put it away? Nothing? Clean it? A little oil? Martin, it depends on the gun. Did I fire it as a black powder gun? Does it have corrosive salts? If it's corrosive, that was black powder or corrosive primers, I clean it. If it's a gun in the white, meaning it has no protective finish on it at all, like an 1861 Springfield, I oil it. If it's a modern gun, like an AR-15, an AKM, I do nothing. Even if I've shot it, I just put it away. Bunny, why isn't subsonic suppressed 7.62x39 more of a thing given the high cost and unavailability of 300 Blackout? Because 300 Blackout's perceived as an American cartridge, I believe, and reality is they are very functionally similar and equivalent. But I think there's just no demand. There's no demand for that. Jacob B. Ian recently made a video detailing the Catalog It firearms inventory software and its utility for museums, collectors, and even the average firearms owner. While I can appreciate the changes that make Catalog It more accessible to firearms owners, I don't imagine many of firearms owners rushing to list all of their firearms in a database held online. Do you have any privacy or security concerns with using such a service? If so, is a locally saved spreadsheet physical list the best alternative? Well, here's the thing. A locally saved spreadsheet physical list is something that can be lost. So if you're going to do that, you need to have redundancy, and maybe you should keep it in a lockbox at the bank or something like that. I don't know anything about Catalog It. I haven't looked at it. Just because something's online doesn't mean it's insecure. But just because something's online probably can mean that it is insecure. So it's possible Catalog It's excellent security. I have no idea. I don't know what you have to look into what their security measures are. Is it encrypted? What's the encryption solution? How do they do the encryption? Do you keep the private keys for the encryption? Because frankly, I wouldn't want to catalog it to know the data in my repository. And properly employed encryption means that the company doesn't have the ability to view their own data that you're storing on their systems. If you retain the encryption keys, they don't have the ability to see the data in their own system. So if that's the way they're architected, I would not be worried about a company, whether it's Catalog It or anyone else, having a repository of this type of information, because the only way to see the information is to have the private key of the encryption solution, which can be then tied to a password that's very high strength that you only retain. So if the encryption's right and the security's right, then I wouldn't worry about it. Then Catalog It's fine. But if the security is not documented and not provided by the company and not really totally explained, then I would not trust it. So if you go there and look at their security page, which I have not looked at, you'd have to know what you're looking for. If they do give you a full rundown of what their security is, and with evidence that it is actually done that way, then I would say Catalog It sounds fine, online or not. But if they're not providing you a true analysis and information about how their security is done and what the encryption is, then I would say Catalog It is a potentially dangerous solution. So I'm not saying that Catalog It is good or bad, I don't know. Any solution like this is dependent upon the security that they provide to you, so you know, but also very much provided the encryption is critical. If you don't retain the keys for the encryption, then you do have to realize you're providing this data at least to the company hosting it, and aggregation of data is always a threat. Let's see here. Stock image. I've been watching for nearly 4 to 5 years now, but only recently decided to support you on Patreon, and it feels nice to support a creator that I spend a lot of my time watching. Thank you for the support. As you know, InRange is only viewer supported. It's critical. Appreciate it. My question is, what are your opinions on the laws concerning shoulder stock pistols from the 20th or 21st century? I think they're ridiculous. Now, what we're talking about here is the ability to put a stock on a pistol, like a Luger or a Mauser or whatever, and use it as like a sort of pistol, or sort of a rifle. Of course, we're seeing some of this going on with braces, etc. But the reality is, the laws that prevent us from using a a stock on an old pistol like a Luger is stupid. The fact that they're neat, they're fun, they're interesting, they've actually damaged the ability to do design and think about what we could do with modern pistols. And this is an example of where the NFA has truly been a hindrance to R&D and what people are able to use. I think they're ridiculous laws, quite honestly. Forrest S. What are decent starter brands and setups for two-gun gear? I found some matches locally, but I have no pouches or suitable rigs. You don't need a lot. You need a holster that's really high retention. And normally, I recommend just a standard Bianchi UM84. It's a flap holster. It's what the military used forever with 1911s and Berettas, the M9. Those things, they're not fast, but two-gun designed properly doesn't have speed draw as much of a concern. So UM84 is great retention, and retention matters very much in two-gun because of the physical nature of the match. As well as when you go down into the dirt, the mud, the water, the UM84 is pretty good about protecting the gun. So a standard Bianchi UM84 holster is exceptional. And it fits a whole lot of standard service pistols. Really, you don't even need pouches at that point. You can honestly get away with sticking magazines in pockets. But some basic pistol pouches that are strong retention, so a basic mag pouch that's high retention, 1 or 2, put on a standard belt with a Bianchi UM84 is all you need. Really, that's all you need. Now, you'll eventually want to do better, but that's all you really need. Iraha. Have you planned to do any history vignettes about different labor disputes like the Battle of Blair Mountain? Yes, that's on the list. I haven't gotten to them. They're not the first ones on the list, but there will be some at some point, I am certain. Michael G. Hi, Carl. First-time asker and recent Patreon. Welcome, and thank you so much. Do you generally get people coming to Desert Brutality as their first event? And if not, is it a bad idea? I do not recommend two-gun action challenge match or any of the brutality matches as a first event. We have a lot of people that come, and it is their first event, but you're really jumping into the deep end of the swimming pool. It's physically oriented, very difficult. The actual shooting is difficult in that environment. If you don't understand the basics and fundamentals of match safety, such as when to load, how to unload, the basic concept of the 180 when you're moving with your pistol or weapon, being unsafe when you're moving on the clock. There are much better, smaller, slower environments in which you could do this, and that are not the brutality matches. So I would say brutality matches and two-gun action challenge match are kind of I would say one of the worst ones to start off as your first match. Does that mean you shouldn't come at all? If that's the only match you'll ever want to attend and you don't want to try anything else, I wouldn't say you shouldn't, but be aware that you want to go at the slowest possible speed that you need to make sure you do everything right. It's not about doing well at that point. It's not well is not getting DQ'd or getting hurt. You should not worry about your score. But I would not generally recommend them as first matches. James H. Do you own a 3D printer? If so, what do you print? If not, why not? I do not own a 3D printer. I have not seen any of that I want to deal with at this point. The cost is still not at a price that I want to really deal with. And I can't think of anything that I really, really want to 3D print yet. And I have people around me that can. And frankly, I can go to them and go, hey, can you work on this for me? The truth is, it just doesn't strike me as something I want really right now. And I don't really have a place to put it even. Gunther. I've been a supporter for years and finally got to support you guys financially. Thank you once again. Wow, lots of new Patreons on this one. I appreciate it. But on to my question. I was recently given a Schofield in 45 Colt, manufactured by Uberti as a gift, and I'm in love with it. Congratulations. Schofield is an amazing revolver. I don't want to break it, and I can't find any information about it when I search, but is it okay to let the barrel and cylinder fall when unloading and reloading, or should I use my hand to support it on the way down? So what he means is when you cock the hammer and then move the latch, that is a gun, of course, a break open action, and at some point a plunger and a spring will eject the cartridges. What I've found, Gunther, is that if you hold it and do it do it yourself and actually move them, you're going to have better ejection and extraction. So it is kind of for functionality, it's nice to just grab it and kind of do it manually. But you can't just open it and let it fall. You might find that it may not extract and eject properly if you do so, at least not all the time. So that's one argument against not letting it just drop. Grabbing it and doing it manually seems to work better for me. However, I do not believe you will break the gun in doing so, and I think you're fine doing so. Keep in mind that you're adding wear and tear to the weapon when you're doing that. Another thing I want you to remember is that the screw that holds those two parts together, where the pivot point is, will come loose over time, and make sure you tighten that up intermittently. But I think it's okay to let the barrel and cylinder fall when unloading and reloading, but I do think that using your hand to support it's actually a more reliable method. Harris122, third time asking. Sorry, Harris. Is there any relatively easy way to include moving targets, not in swinging back and forth, but completely moving from point A to B on two-gun stages? If so, can you elaborate on some of them? No, there really isn't. There are robots you can buy. There's expensive stuff. I've experimented with cables. None of this stuff is reliable. It's always a problem. The best answer I can come up with is if you have access to a high power range in which there are bunkers, where they target pits. You can have people put targets on sticks and walk with them. And they just essentially raise the stick up and then walk with the stick and have a moving target. The problem then is that you have inconsistency in terms of speed of movement when they're moving from one shooter to another. But that's the best way I've had to do it, and I think it's the most reliable way. So a target on a stick with a person walking in the target pit is the best answer that's low cost and effective. Anything else with cables or robots or ropes never works. I've tried to do it multiple times and failed multiple times. Nick H. Recently got into cap and ball shooting and have been having trouble keeping rust from some of the smaller nooks on my revolver. Any tips for preventing this, or some small rust just part of it? Small rust does not have to be part of it. Once you're done cleaning the gun, what I would recommend is using the best anti-rust or anti-corrosion oil you can, especially like one that is like an aerosol that you can spray with a spray gun, like a spray can, a rattle can or spray can, and spray it and then use a cloth that's an oilcloth to wipe it down. That works. I actually use Croil for that. Ballistol is good. Ballistol is not the best. Croil is excellent as an anti-rust, anti-corrosive corrosion lubricant. So a spray can of Croil, spray it down, wipe it down with a rag, should solve your problem. Oscar, have you ever run a two-gun match at night? No, I have not. I don't plan to. Night matches need to be invite only, and they are very difficult. Running a two-gun match already has tons of safety concerns, and things to think about. And so maybe I would, if I did, I would do it as a invite only event, but I've never done it yet. I have been at night matches though. MRLM002. What are the best long guns for a person with one arm? This is gonna sound self-serving. I'm gonna go ahead and say a what would Stoner do build is excellent for that, especially with a shorter barrel, but even the 16-inch pencil barrel. The weight of the gun and the way it balances allows you to literally hold it with one arm, no problem whatsoever, regardless of which arm it is. And the weight and the length and the way it balances means that there's not this like forward balance issue where it kind of tends to droop. And the what would Stoner do build, whether the 2017 or the 2020, is an excellent solution for one-arm shooter. Also, believe it or not, this is where sometimes bullpups are good. Some of them are too heavy, but because the weight is balanced in the rear, it allows you to one-arm it much easier than a lot of other more traditional rifle designs. So I would say some of the bullpups, especially the lighter ones, and the what would Stoner do builds, whether the 2017 or the 2020 that you can buy from Brownells or at least pre-order, are the best answers. And we also have the what would Stoner do CDR at Brownells, which is more readily available. Any one of those solutions, bullpup or what would Stoner do, is excellent for a person with one arm. And ambidextrous matters on that too, because you can get to any side of it. That's another thing to think about. Sean S. And this is the last question for this Patreon Q&A. What is something that the sci-fi of your youth didn't prepare you for in 2021, good or bad? Well, the sci-fi of my youth, and I mentioned this earlier, is I really loved watching cyberpunk dystopia. And I still enjoy the concepts, and I enjoy the technology, and I enjoy the grittiness, and even some of the noir elements like Blade Runner. But I'll tell you, you know what, Sean? You know what it didn't prepare me for in 2021 was to live in one. We really are encroaching very closely to the reality of the sci-fi of that cyberpunk dystopia. A small number of corporations owning everything, controls and restrictions on things that we thought were going to be liberating tools becoming prisons, surveillance in the world, whether it's the device in your hand or on the street, facial recognition, a slowly enclosing prison of tools that were meant to be something to liberate the human mind, but instead are now being used to control it, as well as the dissemination of bad information, conspiracy theories, and all the things that we we would read about or watch in cyberpunk films, and now we see it being so much more the reality of our world than ever. So while it was an interesting thought experiment, and it still is, to enjoy some of that science fiction, what it did not prepare me for was to live in it. And I'm sad to say that I bet a lot of you in the audience feel the same way. I don't want to end on a dour note, so I'm going to end on a happy note. I want to say that I'm so thankful to everyone out here in the audience that's watching this. You made it through this long Q&A. I'm so thankful to everyone in the Patreon group that keep InRange alive. As I said earlier, no sponsors, no advertisers, no overlords. This is completely you, the viewer, Patreon only. That is the only funding source for InRange. We do make a little bit of money off of each What Would Stoner Do rifle sold through Brownells, but really it's Patreon that keeps InRange alive. Thank you for that. Thank you for believing this project, and thank you for letting us fight that corporate oligarchy by still being here and making content that is not promoted by the algorithm. So on that note, if you're not a Patreon supporter, please consider it. You can find us at patreon.com/InRangeTV. If you can't, I understand. Please subscribe to the channel. We're also on multiple different distribution points, not just YouTube. You can find them all at InRange.tv/watch. But most importantly, if you want to help me fight the algorithm, leave a comment below, subscribe, and share with your friends, because I require you, as an organic element of the algorithm, for lack of a better term, to provide this kind of content to people who wouldn't see it otherwise, because YouTube sticks it in a deep, dark hole where no one will find it unless you share it. I appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. More to come.